A pleasure to be joined by the one, the only, Dr. Matthew Spalding, over from Hillsdale. He's the Vice President of Washington Operations and the Dean of the Van Andel Graduate School of Government. Again, you know Hillsdale College. I know Hillsdale College. And even though I didn't go to Hillsdale, I hear about it all the time, and for good reason. Doctor, thanks for joining us.
It's great being with you. Thanks for having me on.
So I'm hearing a lot of conversation online all the time about what it means to be an American. There are those who suggest that it's a creedal kind of situation. There are those who suggest that it's really about your lineage and your heritage or some other third thing. So you've just written about this kind of thing regarding the Declaration of Independence. Tell us about this a little bit.
No, that's a great question. Great way to launch the conversation. I mean, look, we're going into this anniversary of the Declaration, 250th of the country. It's a great opportunity to, it'll get a lot of attention and time to go back and kind of relearn a lot of these things. One of my concerns right now is that a lot of the current debate, indeed, I think much of the current debate about America, about politics for that matter, is it really about America? And it really goes back to these kinds of questions. What is it that makes us a people? And so that's kind of why I wrote the book. I mean, obviously it's because of the anniversary, but more importantly, it's to kind of get into these questions to really, rather than the immediate debate, we got to kind of go back to the fundamentals, just like the founders themselves. We need to be radical, go back to the root of the thing, to the beginning. But on your point, then, I wanted to go through the Declaration and tell the history of it, let it tell its own story, because I think an answer to a lot of these questions are found there. The simple answer in many ways is we're a bit of a combination of things. But first, what we're not. The American founding clearly wants to reject the old European traditions of politics.
Nobility and throwing people under the feudal wagon and all of that.
Exactly. Feudalism, aristocracy, monarchy. It's no coincidence. We've never had a class-based society here, as much as the left likes to complain, compared to, say, a European country. They will reject all of that and put something else in its place. The worry on the some of our friends on the right, but on the left as well, is it introduces this creedal thing, and what does that mean? And that's going to cause all sorts of problems. But there's a certain mix of things, and it comes across in the Declaration this question about what is it that makes it a people? Because in the Declaration, it turns out we're already a people. We're a people severing ourselves from another. Clearly, they understand America as to be a nation of a particular place, a particular people. The Eastern Seaboard, how it's founded, its history, what comes into it, all of that is important. They don't mean to get rid of that at all.
Right. Place
is important. Place is the grounding of our nation, but that's insufficient. In a republic, which is a republic of free citizens through deliberation and choice, governing themselves and governing together as a community, you need a common commitment to some ideas. That's just, at the very least, you need a commitment to self-government. And so in that sense, we are also creedal. The criticism today is that when people throw that word out, creedal, it's a criticism of the belief that we're only creedal and we're creedal and it's all that matters, and there you go, we're off to the races.
Right.
That's clearly not true either. It's this intertwining of these things. We're a particular people, a particular nation, but we have certain universal principles. And that's actually key to the argument, because having an understanding of the universal principles gets us to something even more important that we want to go back to, which is the very concept that there are, wait for it, truths. There are actual truths that we as human beings can come to know, and they can actually guide us in our politics. And that's the rootedness that I want to get back to by going back to the Declaration.
I can't help but draw a couple of parallels here theologically. The rationale in the New Testament that, faith without works is dead. The concept that you really can't have one.
Yeah, good reference.
The other. And when I think about the culture of the United States, a core American culture, the thing that Teddy Roosevelt would argue in favor of, I'm kind of pulling from the naturalist just to be transparent. Yeah. But in the concept of the American people, the idea that, well, if you just believe these four things on a flashcard, that makes you American. Well, is that really true? People would say no, but is just having this, well, I have European heritage or I have Native American heritage, perhaps on the left would say, that is not in and of itself some magical panacea either.
Right.
So
It's a combination of both. But here's the question. Those two things come together at some point. That is, at a particular point in time, or as the Declaration says, when in the course of human events.
Thank you. I knew we were going to go there. Please take it.
Particular people at a particular time, through a deliberative process, through creating a Continental Congress, through passing a piece of legislation called the Declaration of Independence, commit themselves to an idea. And it's not merely it's an idea for the sake of an idea, and that's what we do. It's a claim, if you will. The Declaration says we hold these truths to be self-evident, which is say it's not based on subjective values. This is not merely your truth and my truth. This is not merely kind of a postmodern deconstructionist view of what we construct as our own narrative. The founding and the Declaration in particular is based on our particular situation. It's very particular. The grievances, our fight, our taxes, our harbors, our people.
Both against the Anglosphere and the Francosphere.
All of that is true. But the radical thing about it, which is why American is exceptional, is because it's that particular people saying, no, wait, there are truths that human minds can understand, not just Americans. The human mind can understand we are equal. And because of that equality, which is not to say welfare and all that kind of equality, right? We are equal in principle. We are equally human, which gives rise to what? We have equal rights that are inherent in the human person. And the only way to have a fair and just and legitimate government is based on consent.
Exactly.
That's the grounding of free government right there. And it all turns upon this claim of metaphysical freedom, which means it requires that you have something rather than merely depending on your ethnicity, your traditional heritage, your, being German by descent or whatever it might be. There's
Correct.
Something else. Otherwise, you can't be a free country. You could be German, you could be French, but America is different.
Right.
And understanding that intertwining is key to understanding what America is, which means being an American is not physically being here, but it's also not, as you said, checking a box off of 5 things and saying I'm an American. It's kind of, you got to kind of be here and imbibe and, as we say with immigration, assimilate to those principles as well as to become part of our way of life.
And this is where I think that the argument that American culture is in by its nature Abrahamic, it is pioneering, to go to a land of which I will show you, because it requires you to be a part of the American culture. You must cast aside the things of the cultural foundation from which you came. I think of this regarding French immigrants to the United States in the early Americas who were disgusted with how the French government treated la classe populaire. All right, you had all of the king's ordinances that suggested, well, we're going to tax the lower class or the farming class because I say they have it too easy. And the rights coming from the king, given his divine right to rule. And then what came out of that in contrast was the bloodiest revolution we'd seen.
Yeah. So
you have to cast that aside to be American.
Yeah, you make a very interesting point here by that reference. I would argue that the American founding, we always, we're usually taught in school the American founding is this radically modern thing.
Right.
It's kind of secular rationalism and it's the Enlightenment and this kind of thing. And I think it's such nonsense. Yes, those were influences. I mean, the Enlightenment is important and Locke, and these are all important parts, but they clearly understood them to be part of this older tradition, going back to the Greeks and Romans, but especially back to the Christian tradition and the Hebraic tradition.
Not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, the things that had sprung out of corruption in the last 1,000 years.
But I'll think about it this way. The Americans are going back to something older. There's the European tradition, which is despotism, monarchy, divine right, absolute government.
The plague.
They wanted to reject that. The rise of absolutism is a modern thing. What the Americans want to do is go back to an older tradition.
Well said.
Is a tradition that's consistent with the Greek and Roman idea of citizenship, with the Christian tradition of equality. And then how do we form a government based on that? That's a radical idea, which is why we can say they're radical in the sense that the word radical means going back to the root of things.
Mm-hmm.
That's their claim.
I have to kind of stop you up ahead here, because if we start going into etymology, I'm going to start getting excited. My knee's going to start bouncing, and I'm going to get made fun of by the comment section. But to another reference here, I already have a comment here saying, "Oh, great, he mentioned citizenship. Tony's going to start talking about Robert Heinlein." I'm glad that you talked about this idea of classical Greco and Roman investment into the society, because as you point out very, very clearly, by the time we get to the Declaration of Independence, we had been steeped in this: you are owing your allegiance to your country and to your people because your king has been so ordained, with the right to hold you in his, as your liege lord. But in the Greco-Roman fully investment, to give one's life for one's country, to put yourself between the cold darkness of the wilderness and your people based on ideals, it creates a recipe that is equal parts revolutionary in contrast to the old fetid corruption that had become the norm at the time, while simultaneously being one of the greatest old traditions revived in a way that had never really been seen. And it worked.
No, that's actually very nicely stated. From the American perspective, the rise of absolute monarchy and subjects in the sense that which you're thinking of, where you're an absolute subject to the king, for the Americans, that was the detour. The Americans think of this older
detour.
tradition. If you go back to Magna Carta,
yes, sir,
the English tradition is moving in the direction of what? Parliament, legislative power. It's beginning to recognize there are rights, right? If you think of Coke and some of the great common law thinkers, there's something going there. The absolutism rises later. And that's in many ways which creates the fuel and gives rise to the American Revolution. No, the Americans want to go back to that older sense of English rule, which, by the way, was deeply rooted before Magna Carta. It was deeply shaped by the medieval traditions, which in turn were deeply shaped by the Roman sense, precisely what you're talking about here.
William Blackstone cited that, didn't he?
William Blackstone is on the side of that, although when it came to push to shove, he kind of took the side of the,
Tory.
English monarchy.
Yeah.
The Americans like Edward Coke more, who's much more in that line. But again, to the point, though, the Americans saw themselves as recovering this older thing. I mean, in writing this book, one of the things I've discovered, even more so than I thought before, was the influence of, in particular, Cicero and the Romans. The American educational system at the time, which is the educational system that shaped the particular founders at the Continental Congress, was heavily influenced by the classics. The model they wanted to create. Look at the architecture in Washington. Think of what they did. Their homes, it's Roman. They want to emulate the virtues of the old Roman virtues, the strong virtues, that sense of patriotism. They want to get away from absolutism. They see the British absolutism as something that post 1688, right? That's what the English Civil Wars are about. It went the wrong direction. It revived divine monarchy. That's what triggered the whole problem. They want to recover this older tradition
that wasn't based on the idea of parliament for the few or parliament for the home island, but parliament for those who are a part of that broader expanse.
The Americans take the logic of the development of parliamentary legislative power. They follow that logic to its conclusion, and they intertwine that with these other traditions. They look back to the Romans. But if you follow the argument that's laid out there, the British could never go there. Right? The king fought back, and the king wanted more absolute power, and the king in parliament becomes this other thing. And they remain serfs and subjects, and the Americans break. Why? Because we are a people.
Right.
The Declaration, that means we are a people who will govern ourselves.
It's a call to something higher. It really is. I refuse to say, oh, it's a call to something different. No, it's a call to something higher because it requires the converse of privilege here would be responsibility. You have a duty as an American to uphold, to maintain, and to keep this republic. And the best way to do so, may I pose, is to start off by understanding the conditions of the Declaration of Independence. You have to read Dr. Spalding's book. It's excellent stuff. We're going to link it in the description. Thank you so much for coming on with us, Doctor.
Thanks for having
I hate to cut it short.
Look forward to more.
We will. We're gonna have you back, or the next time I'm in DC, we're gonna chat because I'm getting too excited. Every time I talk to someone from Hillsdale, this always happens. I'm like, oh man,
real history does that to you. Real history is actually great. The problem is today we don't teach it well. Well-taught history brings out the transcendence and the eternal truths, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, because how we're built. That narrative drive is literally what held Scripture together in its formative year. All right, I'm sorry, I am really Dr. Spalding again. Thank you so much.